This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hi there, Duke fans. DBR Bites episode 77 coming at you here. Jason Evans for your listening enjoyment. I'm joined by my buddy, Donald Wine. It is Friday afternoon, a couple days after Christmas. Donald, I have to ask, did you get any great presents over the holiday?
So I'm back in DC.
By the way, folks, I surprised Donald. He did not know I was going to ask him that. I didn't know I was going to ask him that until it came out of my mouth. So
I didn't get a lot of gifts. My brother couldn't, whatever he was going to give me. It's a surprise. I haven't actually got it yet because he's going to mail it to me. But he did give me some nice, I didn't know they made these. They have some Duke Crocs, like the normal Crocs that run the mill Crocs, but it has a, Duke logo on it and in Duke colors. I actually couldn't even bring those back with me. I didn't have enough stuff. What I did do, Jason, is, I don't know if you've heard of these, but if you haven't, you need to get familiar with them. Buc-ee's. I went to Buc-ee's. There's one close to my dad's house, and got myself a hoodie. I got myself a t-shirt. I got myself some Cajun seasoning. I got a pin for my hat, and I got a beanie, which I'm going to wear tonight when I go to dinner. So I got all buckied out. So I'm set. That plus the Crocs, I'm good for another year.
for people who do not follow me on TwitX or whatever the hell you want to call it, I posted the best gift that I got, which was my son Alec, who lives out in LA, works for the Walt Disney Company in corporate strategy and stuff. He got me a pair of Nike Duke Blue Devil sneakers that are fire. They are fire.
They are so comfortable. First of all, the Air
incredible.
Pegasus, the Air Pegasus is the greatest shoe ever made. Period. I will not entertain any debate. But also, I got the version. You got the. I think is this year's version you got. The white
I
ones?
guess because he just got them a couple of weeks ago. So yeah.
Yeah, because so last year was also white. I got 2 years ago. It was an all blue pair. That has the Duke logo on the side. I got that pair, and let me tell you, they are without a doubt my favorite shoe. I wear them at all the Duke games, including Jason. I'll be going down to the Virginia Tech game next week on New Year's Eve, and so if you see a pair of those around, it may not be me because those pairs are very common. There's probably a lot of people in camera that have that pair of shoe, but they are very comfortable.
Yeah. So my dilemma now is that these are such beautiful shoes. I'm afraid to wear them because I will start to scuff them up or something. I mean, clearly wear them to Duke games. Of course, that's a no-brainer. But like, I kind of need a pair of tennis shoes. I kind of need a pair of sneakers I can wear for other stuff. And every
Those
time
are
I
not
wear
it.
these,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be terrified of any puddles or mud or anything anytime I wear these gorgeous creatures.
Anytime you have a Duke game, very, very appropriate. If you're going to watch a Duke game, if you're like, leaving the house and going somewhere to watch the game, great use of those. Don't wear them at like, Albertsons or Kroger or something like that. People step on them. Someone drops something on them. Then you got to fight somebody over sneakers. I promise you, that's not a place you want to be. It's not a world you want to be in, Jason.
Right.
But yes, they're very, very nice shoes. But yeah, don't go running in them. Use them for the special occasions. UNC game, perfectly appropriate.
Yes, exactly. All right, let's get to some of the topics we have on this edition of DBR Bites. Just so folks know, we're going to be talking about some things related to Duke, but then we're going to get to the big news out of the ACC. After the break, we're going to be talking about Jim Larranaga leaving Miami, what it means for the conference, what it says about NIL and that kind of stuff, because there's a lot to unpack there. And Donald, as you all know, it has a strong connection to that Miami program. So we're going to definitely be interested in his thoughts. But before we get to that, let's get to the transfer portal. God, it kind of feels backwards a little bit, Donald, because all these things we're going to talk about are things that Jim Larranaga was clearly bothered by. But in the transfer portal, shortly after you and I recorded the other day, the news came out about Darian Mensah. According to CBS Sports, Darian Mensah is going to be earning $8 million from the Duke NIL collective, paid, functionally by Duke boosters, Duke supporters, $8 million over 2 years to be the Duke quarterback. And there are a couple things I want to say really quick, Donald, then I'll let you get in. The first one is, put the number aside for a moment. The fact that Duke apparently has reached some kind of agreement with Darian Mensah for him to play at Duke for the next 2 years is, to me, a very big deal and a great, great thing. One of the great complaints that we have had about NIL, about the transfer portal, about the way this all this, sort of new era that we've been in for a few years now. One of the complaints about it is you don't get to know guys enough. You can't count on team building the way you could in the past. If you develop a player, he may leave to go elsewhere. The notion that Duke has taken a guy and locked him up theoretically for 2 years, to me, is great news for the Duke program. And this is kind of how, look, in the pros, this is how it works. In professional sports, you sign a guy for multiple seasons if you can. If you can reach agreement with them on how the money makes sense and all the other terms, and you go, let's do this over a couple of years, and they go, great. That should be how it works. So that part about it, I'm thrilled. And then the other thing is, I'm at least a tiny bit skeptical of the size of the figure, the $8 million figure. I've spoken to some people, not people who would know directly about this deal, but people who do know a bit about what's going on at Duke and all that other kind of stuff inside the programs. And people are like, 8 million? In fact, someone who knows a lot about this said to me, if you tell me 4 million for 2 years, he goes, I can believe that. 8 million for 2 years? He goes, I'm not as sure about that figure. And in fact, I was sort of thinking about it. If you were someone who was getting this, sourced and the such, you're just getting nips and nibbles and little bits here and there. Maybe you got confused. Maybe they go 4 million 2 years, and you went, oh, that means 4 million each year, and you came up with a figure of 8. I'm just saying, I'm just not sure that Duke was quite at the point that they're going to pay $8 million over 2 years for even a great quarterback prospect like Darian Mensah.
So I'm gonna come back to that in a second because I think you made a great point. I want to go first to your point about the 2-year deal. And again, I think that's great. Now I'm gonna throw a little bit of cold water on it, Jason. He is a redshirt freshman, which means he has completed 2 years of college.
Correct.
Which means after next year,
he's NFL eligible. Yeah,
he's NFL eligible. So if he has first of all, if he has a dynamite year and is someone who could get drafted in the NFL draft and can go, hey, that means he had a really, really good quarterback for the time he was here. So I will say that is possible, but the locking in of 2 years, again, is something that teams can do. Nigel Pack did it at Miami. They said, hey, you got to be here 2 years to get all of this money. And it could be, again, where you have guys who sign for 1 year, guys who sign for 3, like a Spencer Hubbard's like, hey, I'm going to come for 4 years. Just, ink me to something for 4 years, right? There's nothing stopping collectives from creating these deals, just like any other professional league where they have guys who are on 1-year contracts, guys who are on 8-year contracts in hockey. So that part I think is good. And I think it's also showing, hey, we want you here and we want to build a program around you because you build an offense around the quarterback and around that style of offense. So I think it's great to have that continuity. And again, hopefully that we get to see Darian Mensah in Duke Blue for 2 years. Now, to the figure, when this article came out, you were skeptical. I was skeptical. I was mainly skeptical because of the point that even at $4 million per year, that is actually, if that were true, that would be the largest NIL deal ever signed by a
Correct.
football player.
Yes.
I think Malik Murphy was somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 750K last year. So it's not again, are we going to upgrade the offense? Sure. Are we going to do it by maybe paying a premium? Yes. Maybe did we add some extra money to it to say, hey, stay for 2 years, we'll give you a little bit more? Sure. But to go from 600 or 750K, let's say 750 to 4 million is a huge bump for one guy. And I just don't feel that that's probably the case. I think I'm with you in that probably someone heard $4 million over 2 years and said 4 million times two is eight. Eight's a lot more, and I can put this out there as sources. And again, I'm not just diminishing the sources. I just don't think that is the case. And also, I don't think that Duke has taken. They probably have stepped up a lot in a lot of places because, as we've talked about, the offense is having a lot of guys come in, and I'm sure they're not wasting any of that NIL money that has been raised for it. But if we're paying $4 million for a quarterback, again, the largest NIL deal ever signed by a football player, then that means we're playing, maybe $1 million for like a wide receiver, 750 for for a couple linemen, that sort of thing, for some skill players. All that adds up, and I don't think we're making a ginormous leap in that regard in NIL money. And again, I could be wrong, and this could all be true, but I'm liable to be skeptical about it. But I think the great part about this, Jason, is guess who's in the news? Duke football.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
whether it's true or
In a
not,
positive
right?
way, in a good way.
In a positive
Yeah.
way, where again, even if that number is off by a million or five, maybe that tells other recruits, Duke's opening the wallet a little bit. Maybe I should give them a second look when they come calling.
Well, and the other thing to note is NIL. I mean, NIL's to say NIL's the Wild West. No one knows what's going on. That's been the story for like 3+ years now. But with the House settlement, when we've talked about this a little bit, with the settlement coming that everyone expects to be in place for next season in the revenue sports, schools will be able to spend, a power conference school like Duke will be required to spend upwards of $20 million on school NIL to athletes. And let's say, I'm just going to throw out a figure and say that Duke was spending about $5 million on the football team's NIL over the past year. I guarantee you that under that settlement, Duke's going to have to add probably around $10 million to its football NIL budget. A budget that was 5 goes to 15, with 10 of it coming from Duke itself. I'm just pulling those figures out of the air. I don't know any of those for a fact, but those are figures that they make a lot of sense based on a lot of different things that I've heard and observed. Well, suddenly, if you're going to add $10 million a year to the Duke football NIL budget, well, affording a $4 million quarterback isn't as crazy as it sounds. What do you think?
Also, I mean, yes, I think the answer is yes. But again, I don't know that Duke is setting the record here, right? Like, and again, that record's going to hold for what, 6 months until AJ DeBonce comes in and he's getting five,
Right. Yeah.
5 to 7, whatever that number is. I think the idea here, though, is also that $20 million is spread out over it's supposed to be spread out over all the sports, but of course they're going to focus on the main revenue sports of football and men's basketball. Now, the increase in money that you just said, taking that $10 million, for example, that's not spread out like for basketball. It's spread out over what, 13 guys, 14 guys, maybe 15.
Well,
And
the reality is it's spread over about 10 or 11.
My point is, on a basketball team, you have 15 guys, maybe 16 guys, right? Of which maybe one gets the scholarship in a dream type of NIL figure. Football, it is 105 guys that are on scholarship, of which, again, Darian Minson was not getting money as a third string quarterback last year, and has now gone to 4 million or 2 million, whatever you want to call it. But there's still more guys to spread that around, so it doesn't mean that everyone's going to be getting these $1 million contracts, because
Right.
there's only 10 million to go around amongst, again, if you have 22 starters, that's still, less than $1 million to go around. So they're still going to be picking and choosing here. There's still going to be some guys who are going to be making more than others. And then, as we'll probably, I'll save the talk about the transparency for later on. But I think the idea here is even as the numbers go up, don't expect the NIL numbers to go up exponentially, because at a certain point, these guys are going to be making more than they would be as a rookie in the NFL. And that is what the NCAA is hoping to avoid by giving them this locked in figure. It's not to make it where everyone can get these $1 million contracts. It's to kind of say, okay, let's kind of reel it in a little bit here while saving the money and being able to use it in different ways for different special talents.
Yeah. By the way, a little bit of other portal news regarding football we should talk about. First of all, we should mention that Star Thomas, who, because of the injury to Jaquez Moore, was forced into a much bigger role last season than anticipated for Duke. Star Thomas has entered the transfer portal. We're bummed to lose him, although it's surprising that he was even able to play another year. Star Thomas had been at a junior college for 2 years. He was it New Mexico State, I believe it was.
New Mexico State before
Yeah.
Duke. Yeah.
Yeah, for 2 years, and then at Duke. And you would think, well, that's all his eligibility, but because we mentioned this on a previous episode, because of this court ruling regarding JUCO players, they're being granted an extra year. And so Star Thomas suddenly found himself with an extra year of eligibility, and he said nothing but good things about Duke. Said he was, in fact, all but implied that he was really bummed that he couldn't continue his career at Duke, but he's going to enter the portal. He's going to go elsewhere. I think this is a guy who needs to look for the best payday, and Duke may not have been able to offer him quite as good a payday because Jaquez Moore is going to be back next year by all accounts, and I think Duke is looking at a few other kind of players in the portal. We've got some nice depth at running back, and I think we weren't going to be able to pay Star Thomas starter kind of money, and he wants to be a starter and thinks he's good enough to be a starter someplace. And he certainly had a run of like 3 or 4 games in a row at Duke where he looked every bit good enough to be a starter on a power conference team. So we wish him all the best as he ventures out. The portal giveth, the portal taketh. Donald, any other feelings about that football stuff before we move on?
No, in a season where we kind of, criticized the running game, Star was the star. Where there wasn't a lot of
Yep.
star like performances, he was the star for a lot of the season. As you mentioned, I think the fact that Jaquez Moore is back and is expected to be back at Duke next year and was expected to be the starter this year before he got hurt.
Right.
Star Thomas was like, hey, I got a chance to be seen, and now I can go and be a starter somewhere else. Again, he's going to get the payday. I don't necessarily know that this is about the payday. It's about the fact that he gets a chance to play his final year somewhere else instead of once again being a backup, and he's earned that. We wish him the best. It was fun to watch him. And I go back to that third game where he broke out and had 144 yards, and he had just had his kid, his baby son. And he had been waiting, like the son came like 3 weeks late. So he was like kind of sitting there like all stressed out over all of this and worrying about like his partner and all this stuff. And then the baby was born, and all of a sudden he was like, oh, now I feel this weight lifted off my shoulders. I'm a dad now. I can go play. And the way he was able to emerge from there was very, very special. So we wish him the best. Really looking forward to hopefully not playing against him next year, because that would be a pain. But I really, really, really enjoyed watching him play this year.
Yeah, our next topic. Let's get through this one a little bit. There's a post on the DBR boards on the Duke Basketball Report forums by Nugget, Nugget frankly has been around the DBR forums for like 2 decades. I've been reading stuff from this guy for a long, long time. And Nugget dove into the net rankings of the ACC versus the other power conferences. Donald, you and I have discussed the fact that the ACC is having a down year, even worse perhaps than some of the down years they've had recently. Well, Nugget really put a fine point on it. He looked at the net ranking, and he looked at how many teams in each power conference are outside of the top 100 in the net. Top 100. The SEC has 0 teams. Big East 1, Big 12 2, Big 10 2. So in the other 4 power conferences, that's a total of 5 teams outside the top 100. How many does the ACC have? 9. Half the conference is ranked outside the top 100 in the net. And as a result of the ACC being, well, shitty, no other word for it. As a result of the ACC being so shitty, especially the back half of the conference, Duke is just not going to have any margin for error when we're playing these terrible teams. Nugget went ahead and looked at your quad 3 and quad 4 conference games. He didn't look at everybody's schedule. But, when we're talking about the quadrants, quad 1 games, huge. Team has to get those. Quad 2 games, they're good. But the thing about a quad 2 game is, you know what? If you lose it, it's not the end of the world. Quad 3 and quad 4 games, you can't lose. If you want to be a number 1, number 2 seed, it's almost impossible for you to lose a quad 3 or quad 4 game. And if you're in the SEC, for example, there's no quad 4 games. Zero. Not a single quad 4 game. There's only one quad 3 game in the SEC. If you play a home game against South Carolina, the worst team in the SEC, that's the only quad 3 game on your schedule. But as we go down and hit the ACC, there are 15 quad 3 games for the ACC. There are all kinds of teams where it doesn't matter whether you play them home or away. It's a quad 3 game or a quad 4 game. Georgia Tech, BC, Virginia Tech are quad 4 opponents if you play them at home. This is just, the conference is abysmally bad. And we've sort of talked a little bit about this, Donald, but I just thought this was a good way to have people understand. I mean, yeah, it's great that Duke beat Georgia Tech on the road. That's a quad 3 win. The NCAA tournament committee is just like not interested in it. It only matters if you lose it. And so Duke's schedule is just going to be a litany of games where you can't afford a loss. You just can't. It looks so bad for you to lose to some of these ACC teams that are so dreadfully awful. These teams that are in the 120s, 130s, 170s, 200s in the net rankings. And it makes it difficult for Duke, A, to impress, but more importantly, B, you just can't, with a young Duke team, you can't stumble. Even a tiny stumble is just going to look awful on your resume.
Duke has, I'm sorry, in the top 25, there is only one ACC team that is ranked. No one needs to guess who that team is because you're listening to the Duke Basketball Roundup. The biggest detriment to our conference schedule, Jason, is that we can't play ourselves.
Yeah.
We can't play ourselves. Everything short of a loss to UNC or maybe Clemson is considered a bad loss. And
well, now hold on. Pitt, because UNC isn't that good. Pitt and Clemson, like I think there are losses that Duke could suffer that would be forgivable. Certainly at UNC and at Clemson. Mm-hmm. Losing to Pitt at home, I mean, yeah, I think Pitt is still very highly regarded by the net. So I think we can afford that. But there's not a lot other than those.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Jason, they have to play the same schedule that we do, right? Like in the same sense, they have to play the same teams in the ACC. So like their net is not going to necessarily fluctuate that much. That's the real problem here, is that none of these teams have a chance really to really boost their profile a considerable amount. Like those 200s, unless they start going on a tear, they're not going to get into the top of the 100s or even the 99s or something like that, where it can be viewed, oh yeah, this team got better as the season went along. You're only going to get a couple of those teams that are going to be able to do that. For the rest of them, when a 150 team plays a 175 team, guess who goes up to the hundreds, to the like high hundreds? None of them, right? Like there's no room for them to really grow unless one team from the bottom kind of elevates themselves very quickly. And so that's what needs to happen for the ACC, is that the bottom teams need to come out on a tear and start beating people, not us. Because the idea here is that we need to get the bottom half up a little bit more before we can concentrate on the ones that are in the middle, because the ones in the middle are just going to be, kind of going up and down amongst themselves. But I think also, Jason, we kind of have ACC tinged glasses, and shout out Sam, who has no ACC glasses on. Guess who does not have an ACC glass on? Who is like Sam? It's the committee. They're not going to look at a loss to Pitt and go, that's okay. That's okay. Even with the net, right? Because they consider a bunch of other different things. And the idea is that the narrative is out. The ACC is down. And you have like the Mountain West talking about maybe having multiple bids, right? So there's teams that we are seeing that are in mid-major conferences that are being given more credit and more respect than teams in the middle of the pack in the ACC. And that should never happen. And I think the idea here is that the team that like Duke is going to have to not necessarily run the table, but they have to make it where it's convincing going away. Like they have to win the conference by a few games, maybe. They have to win the conference tournament to to get it a one seed. And that's the end goal, so we can have in theory the easiest path, but maybe it's not. But I think at the end of the day, the ACC is in a real bind here. Our stat game that we category is in a real danger here because right now, if you look at this at the way this thing is shaking out, UNC is going to get like maybe the respect bump of being UNC, but Clemson needs to do well to make sure that they get the respect, and Pitt also does because Pitt just doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. We saw that last year. We've seen it a few times. So this is going to be a big problem if the ACC, especially those bottom teams, except against Duke, do not start functioning like a ACC basketball team. Ricky Tick.
By the way, the one team we haven't mentioned who actually does look like they could be maybe a tournament contender from the ACC. We've talked about Duke, Clemson, Pitt, North Carolina, SMU, and then to a lesser extent Louisville. SMU and Louisville are the other teams that, at least in terms of the computer rankings, the net rankings, that kind of stuff, they look like they have a chance if they do really well. Of course, that means that especially for SMU when they play Duke, that's going to be a really, really big. We've
Right.
got Virginia Tech coming up, and you and I will do a preview of that Virginia Tech game. But our next game after that Virginia Tech game is at SMU, and other than the game at Clemson, that's probably the second toughest game on the Duke schedule. Actually, I guess at Carolina, at SMU, at Clemson. Those are the three most difficult games Duke has left, and one of them's coming up in like just a week from now or so. All right, we're going to take a quick break, Donald. On the other side, we promised this earlier. We're going to talk about the coaching change in the ACC at Miami. Jim Larranaga hangs it up. No longer coach the Canes. What comes next for Miami? We're back from the break, and there was somewhat shocking news in the ACC this past week, just a couple days ago, as Miami Hurricanes head basketball coach Jim Larranaga he announced that he will no longer be the coach of the Canes. He is hanging it up after a very, very successful career, a career which took him to two Final Fours, one at George Mason, one at Miami. Donald, I went ahead and I said this to you, and I've said it to some other people. When you can say as a coach, I coached my school to far and away the most successful season in that school's history at two different schools, then that is really, really saying something. Jim Larranaga had a heck of a career. Miami struggled. Miami has struggled a lot lately. And so in that sense, it's not that surprising that a 75-year-old guy said, yeah, it's time. But on the other hand, what a legacy he leaves behind himself as, one of the legends in ACC basketball and in the entire coaching career. And luckily, I'm here with you, a Miami Hurricanes expert. Give me your take, baby.
274 wins this was his 14th season at Miami. He's the winningest coach in Miami history. He had 273 wins over 14 seasons at George Mason. He's the winningest coach in George Mason history. And he had 170 wins over 11 seasons at Bowling Green. Lord help me, if he had gotten to 14 at Bowling Green, he probably would have gotten to around 272 or so wins with them, because that's just how the cookie crumbles. Very, very consistent and very, very good everywhere that he went. As you mentioned, the two Final Fours, the only time that or at least first time George Mason went to the Final Four, 2006, that was with Jim Larranaga at the hold. Jim Larranaga also took Miami to their very first Final Four a couple years ago. When they won the ACC regular season, and then he took them all the way after going to the Elite Eight the year before, which was then the best season that Miami had ever had. He took them then to the Final Four the very next year and was within, a few points of getting to the title game. I have nothing but great respect for Coach L and the way that he has made basketball something relevant at Miami, which is very, very hard to do in that culture that surrounds itself with the U, and the whole thing is shaped around the football program. And for him to get a lot of great guys who have gone on to careers in the NBA, Norshad Army are still playing somehow over at Baylor, but so many great guys. And when you think about Miami, they were doormats in the Big East when they were there. When they came to the ACC, people were like, "Great, they'll be a little bit better at basketball, but okay, like that's a game we should always win. There should never be any chance that Miami should be relevant in this conference when it comes to basketball. They were focused on the football. He made them into a regular contender for the ACC title, which is incredible to do in a conference that has so many traditionally power teams, including us, including UNC, and all the teams that we brought in, like a Syracuse, like a Louisville. Guess who has been at the top for most of that time? It's been Miami, and so that's a testament to Coach L and his legacy. And I am glad that he was able to, despite the fact that this was a very tough year for him, he was able to walk away on his own terms. He had earned that right as, again, the best coach that Miami's ever had. And so the great thing was that it wasn't like he was forced to step aside. It was him waking up one day around this holiday and saying, "Nope, that's it. I'm done. Let me continue on my break permanently." So congratulations to him on a great career. I don't know what this means for Miami moving forward. There was talk about what was going to happen with the rest of the season right before he decided to just retire. But they have some questions that they need to do because now the bar has been set, and it is a difficult bar to replicate without him there. So it's going to be a big question of, again, when we talk about money being thrown around and resources and investment. Coach L got that going for the basketball program, and that needs to continue whoever they hire as the next coach.
So we've said all the wonderful things about him. Now let's get to a couple other things, which is this. First of all, Miami had won only 4 of their past 22 games dating back to last season. They went on a 10-game losing streak at the end of last year. This season, they have been abysmally bad considering the amount of talent on the roster, the expectations for that roster. The best win in their past 22 games that they have is a victory over Presbyterian, which is not even in the top 250 teams in the country. I said that correctly. It has been.
We played them last year.
Yeah, yeah. It has been more than 22 games since Miami beat a team ranked in the top 250. Wow. I mean, I don't think anyone could have imagined how bad that team would be playing right now. And I think as much as Jim Larranaga talked about other reasons for him stepping aside, I mean, the pressure had to have been mounting for the way this team was struggling and how poorly it performed at the end of last year and how poorly it was performing over the first 12 games this year. And then, Donald, I do want us to discuss his press conference. Well, go ahead.
Real quick on that, the pressure part, and you and I talked about this in our chat that we have with Sam, and I will say that again, I was just down in Miami and was just down on campus and speaking with people that I know, both in law school and other people associated with Miami athletics, and I will say that there was no, at least at that time, and a lot can change in 2 weeks, there was no pressure at that time to get rid of him. And there was no pressure to fire him midseason or even, like I said, they had started to evaluate, okay, what do we do as a program moving forward? Because there was the talk that after the year was over, that there would be a change, whether he decided to retire or they decided to go in a different direction. But the talk was mainly that he had earned the right to walk away when he was ready to walk away. And despite, and maybe that there may have been some pressure to get him out the door, a lot was changed as we've talked about on this show. They missed out on a lot of recruits, namely the Boozer twins, that might have reinvigorated him and reinvigorated the program and the buzz behind it. And I think that that combined with a lot of guys transferring or going pro has led to kind of that buzz that was present even a couple years ago, really fizzling out very quickly in a way that I think nobody could really imagine. So that, I'm sure, was weighing on a lot of people. But make no mistake, he was not, at least at the time that I was down there a couple weeks ago, there was no talk of him being fired. There was no talk of him being let go early. This announcement was as much of a shock to them as it was to us.
Yeah, and let's get to the announcement because at that announcement, Jim Larranaga basically blamed the way college basketball has changed over the past few years, the transfer portal, NIL. We could pull out a bunch of different quotes, but he just came out and said, this is just not, this is not what I signed up for, and this is not what I'm prepared to deal with. He commented on that Final Four team, and he said he went in the locker room after they'd made the Final Four, after they'd lost to UConn, and I think he said it was 8 guys on the team who said to him, like, "Yeah, I love it here. The school's great. I love playing for you. Everything about it's fabulous. But I need to go in the transfer portal and maximize my money." And then Jim Larranaga talked about the fact that, we only had one guy on an NIL deal a couple years ago, and then we had one or two more, and now it's everybody. And he was very critical of it. He doesn't like the system. Donald, I'll go ahead and say he's correct that there are things that need to be changed. You and I have spent a lot of bandwidth talking about it on this podcast, but I think the tone of his criticism may have been a little more strident than it needed to be. And I would like people to remember that Miami was the first school that sort of made a huge splash in terms of transfer portal NIL when they signed Nigel Pack to a 2-year, $800,000 deal, $400,000 a year, which at the time was just outrageous. No, people couldn't believe it. It was outrageous that one school was doing that for one player. But it was Miami, and that was the dawn of everyone truly understanding that it is pay for play. Even though NIL was supposedly invented so players could profit over their name, image, and likeness, the reality was Miami was the school, and it was a booster who did it. It wasn't it wasn't Miami's choice. It was the choice of one booster. But he went ahead and basically said, "Yeah, I'm paying this guy to play basketball. I'm not paying him to endorse my product, even though he did. I'm not paying for marketing dollars or commercials or anything like that. I'm paying him to play basketball." So for Jim Larranaga to sit here and complain about the system, a system that he at least a little tiny bit helped to propagate, I don't know if it rings that true to me. I don't know if it rings that honest. And it's also worth noting that Miami has been a huge transfer destination over the years, both in the current climate and before the current climate. That Final Four team he had was most of the guys in that team were guys who did not start at Miami. They came from someplace else. And, that's just sort of the way Jim Larranaga built his program. Nothing wrong with it. It's a perfectly fine way of building your program. But to be the guy who stands up here when things are not going well and complain about the system that helped you to succeed, like I say, a little bit of a sour taste, at least to me.
I agree with you. I want to say that again, I have mad respect for Coach L, and he has the right to have this opinion, and he's not the only one who has shared this opinion in the last 3 months, right? Like when Tony Bennett resigned, he did the same thing.
Yep.
And
Yep.
A lot of these older coaches, and I'm going to throw Tony Bennett in there because he's not old, but I'm throwing him into that old guard of coaching. The ones that have stepped aside have all blamed this system. They've blamed the NIL, they've blamed the transfer portal, and all that. And I mean, even, if you think about it, just a couple days ago when we had Ryan Young on, he talked about the fact that after, we were done last year, he said there was a bunch of guys in the locker room who were kind of like, okay, why do I stay? And that question was raised in a different way. And I think the problem with that is that it feeds the narrative that people are latching onto, that NIL is bad and that the transfer portal is bad. I again, as you mentioned, Coach L kind of helped create the system in a way and used it, maximized it to as much as he could until he could no more. And I think the idea here is that the system itself is not what's the problem here. It's the rules. And the rules are set by one entity and one entity only. And that entity is the NCAA. And have you heard from them lately? No.
Right.
I think that's the issue here, is that we talked about the transfer portal during a football season. And people are saying, why is there a transfer portal during a football season? There should not be. That is an easy thing to change instead of just complaining about it, and yet we still have it. there's a lot of things about this system. The transparency aspect of things, as I mentioned, you can sign a guy to a 1 year NIL deal. You can sign him to a 4 year NIL deal. There's nothing stopping you from doing that, but no one knows about that. So that way we get what we had in the first segment when we talked about is it $4 million for Mensa or is it two? We don't know. Is it $5 million for AJ DeBonsa or is it seven? We don't know because there's no transparency in that. In the professional leagues, we know everybody's contract. And I'm not here to try and pocket watch, but at least in the NBA, we know that Jason Tatum's on a 5 year, $314 million deal, right? Like we know that. We know how many years he's getting. We know how many years he has left. We know how much he's getting paid. We know that for Thanasis Antetokounmpo too. We know how much he's making to be the 15th man on the Bucks. In college sports right now, we don't know what anyone is making, so we can use these numbers and fudge them and do whatever we need to get the end goal of what these guys are trying to do is get the best players into their program. And so I am not here to I'm not I don't appreciate or I wouldn't say I don't appreciate. I appreciate their thoughts, but I think they ring hollow because as I said, this is a system that these coaches created in a way. And if in the way that they are walking away from it lends to the narrative that is not true, that NIL is bad and that the transfer portal is bad. And by them leaving the way they are, it only fuels the people who are like, these kids shouldn't be paid. They should just get the scholarships and we should go back to the original system. The original system is gone. This is the new system, but the new system, like any system, can be tweaked. And I think the effort here needs to be focused on how to tweak it to make it where it is equitable for everyone, for the coaches, for the players, for the schools, for the fans. Because yes, you and I, Jason, would love to have next year's freshman class come in and stay here for 4 years, and we get to know them, and we see them become seniors who win national championships for Duke. The reality is that's likely not going to happen. But how do you create a system where we don't feel slighted as fans, that coaches don't feel slighted in having to scramble, that players don't feel like they are trapped? There's a lot of moving parts, and I think the NCAA is the only one who can truly address it. And the way that they have chosen so far to do is to kind of stay hand back and go, y'all figure it out. The y'all is not going to ever figure it out. The y'all is just going to keep the system moving the way it is. So systems need to be set in place so that it is fair and equitable, that there's still opportunities for guys to transfer. There's still opportunities for them to get their money, but everyone is in the know about that. We took the under the table stuff that was likely going on and we moved it above the table, but we didn't bring the transparency, right? Like the transparency was supposed to come with that and it hasn't. And I think that's the thing that is missing. And the problem is when coaches retire, like Coach L did, and they talk about NIL and they use it as a 4-letter word, they really mean the transparency, but they need to go ahead and say it because it's not promoting the right narrative about the system that truly exists.
Yeah. Last word. I just want to comment on one thing you're talking about there with the transparency. When the House settlement is done and schools are part of these NIL payments, then you're going to get a lot more transparency because open records requests are going to tell you at these public schools, at least, we're going to know exactly what UNC is paying in NIL. You're going to be able to request a copy of the contracts that exist between the player and the school. Now, it's possible that there'll be a separate contract. In fact, it's pretty likely there'll be a separate contract between like a collective or, the boosters and the players. But we'll at least begin to get a little more transparency on what the schools are specifically paying these players. And I actually think, like you said, this transparency is a good thing for everyone involved. Right now, you're dealing with rumor, innuendo, and other things that can be manipulated in ways that are bad for the player, bad for the program, and bad for the sport. So, the bottom line in all this, Donald, it's a pity that the NCAA was not able to come up with a system on their own that made sense. It's a pity that we've been operating in the Wild Wild West for several years. I guess we're going to probably continue to operate in it at least a little bit as we move forward. But the NCAA basically has washed their hands of this entire situation, and they didn't have to. You can go back and listen to episodes, 3 years ago when we were like, they know this is coming. We know it's happening. Can you please do something? And the NCAA would do nothing. And so now we've got just this weird system, and we've got coaches who say, I don't know how to work in this system. I'm out.
I'm gonna amend something that you said. You said that the NCAA is ashamed that the NCAA couldn't get something happen. I think this is more in line with what you're thinking and what I'm thinking. It's a shame that they wouldn't, because
Right.
the reason why
To be clear, they could. I believe they could have.
they
Yes.
absolutely could have. They chose not to because they said, "Oh, this will work itself out, and we won't have to expend resources and money and and time on this." And it didn't. And now they have a toothpaste that's way out of the tube, and they're now trying to figure out how to get it back in the tube, but it's not going back. So now they have to figure out how to brush your teeth with it, and they're not trying to do that because they don't want that pressure. Sorry, NCAA, you already got it. So now you have to step up to the table, be adults, and put in and figure this thing out so that that it is equitable for everybody and everyone feels like they're in the know. This is why unionization is happening at some of these schools, Jason, because they want certain things, and the
Yeah.
NCAA is like, y'all figure that out, and they go, okay, fine, we will do that using union, we will do that using the law, we will do that using our collective bargaining power, and and that's what they don't want. And if they don't want that, then they need to get to the table and figure it out, and they need to do it now.
All right. With that, we're going to call it quits in the latest edition of DBR Bites. As usual, we say the word bites, and then we suddenly end up going 45 minutes.
This happens.
It's just
It's
how
fine.
it works with you and me. Yeah, we talk a lot. That's you and me. All right. We will be back in your feed in just a couple days. We have to preview a big bowl game against Ole Miss. We have to preview a big basketball game, ACC conference game against Virginia Tech as Duke wraps up 2024 and moves into 2025. Until then, he's Donald. I'm Jason. And here's the Duke band playing you out and taking you home.
Happy Kwanzaa.